So today's project is installing a CTA swivel for the passenger seat. I will leave the original base on the passenger side. I will be installing a lower base on the driver's side. I'm a little taller, and that swivel will raise the seat about 1.5 inches or so. There's 6 bolts that hold the seat in place, and there's 2 on each side of the back track. And it depends on what kind of Torx tools you have. I've got a small one that's really for a drill driver. I'll use a 1/4-inch socket to use that little Torx bit. It's a T40, so make sure you have a T40 before you get all set to install the seats. So I'm going to pull these 6 bolts, and there are 2 connectors for airbag and some zip ties holding the wires in place. And I'll remove those 2 connectors. We'll need to pull the ground off the battery, disconnect the ground just for safety's sake. That's what's recommended. And so the passenger seat has been removed. Before you move it very far off the base, those zip ties need to be clipped so the wires will be loose. And then there's 3 plugs that have to be disconnected. The purple clip or release will pull back, and then those 2 yellow and orange ones will release. And then there's another black one just right there. So disconnect all 3 wires, and then you can set the seat out of your way to the side before installing your swivel. And so I have the swivel base bolted to the seat base, and save your 6 factory bolts, because those are the bolts that will bolt the swivel base to the seat frame. And then my particular swivel came with hardware to bolt the seat track to the top side of the swivel base. I've not yet connected wires, and I haven't tightened all my bolts, but everything is loosely threaded, and then I'll torque it down. And so the swivel's installed, the seat is bolted back down tight, my wires are connected, and we're all set on the passenger side. Time to move to the driver's side, which will be more involved because I'm installing a lower base. And similarly to the passenger side, 6 bolts on the driver's seat frame, and I've pulled the inside plastic shroud off of the seat base, and those screws are a Torx T20. And now I'm going to move over to the other side and remove that housing, and then the parking brake will need to be removed as well because it bolts the seat base. And so 3 small Torx screws to get the plastic shroud off the driver's side, and then these 3 silver bolts are also a Torx T40 like the seat base frame, and those 3 will need to be removed to remove the parking brake bracket from the seat base. So there's 2 bolts on the front of the seat base. Once those are removed, it just lifts up slightly and comes off the back studs, and you can see the difference in height between the 2 seat bases. It's about 1.5 inches, which is about the thickness of the swivel. So the new seat base should end up putting my seat back at the original height. And I've run into an issue that someone else had mentioned, and that is that these silver studs, which are T55 Torx, are not fitting the new base when they're tightened down. So I'm using a T55 Torx, and I'm loosening those back studs to raise them up. Once the seat base fits on and I get the front bolted, I'll tighten them back down on this new Sportscraft base. So I have the new base in, the front bolts are both tightened down, and then I've come back with my T55 Torx and a long extension down in there to tighten the back mounting studs back up properly. And so now I'm ready to install the swivel on the driver's side. Okay, the driver's side swivel has been mounted using the original 6 factory screws to the new Sportscraft base. The parking brake or e-brake will also mount to this new base. Now the mount has been lowered so that the swivel will still clear the parking brake. So you will have to wiggle and push that brake down just a little bit, but you can see I've got all 3 silver Torx screws into the new base, which was already threaded. And so now I'm going to look at the plastic shrouds for the side, see if I can make those fit. So I was able to trim the plastic side piece, and it's going to go right back in place. I had to cut off the hook here that went over the bar on the old one, and I had to shave off this longer stud. But then I was able to drill 3 pilot holes where this lines right up, and that'll screw right onto the new base. I did have to trim a little bit here, and I had to trim a small amount right here in the front. But make sure you've got it pressed down fairly low so it will clear this swivel when it turns. But that's going to be great, be able to reuse that same plastic trim piece. Okay, the outside of the driver's side seat trim needed some more adjustment because the parking brake lever was lowered and it's getting really tight between the brake and this piece of trim. We need a little more adjustment. So because the handle stops lower, right here in this trim need to be trimmed out some more. On the back side, I made a little adjustment here where this corner will fit around this. A little bit at the bottom front so that it would go in further. Again, had to cut the little hook off, as well as enlarge, harder to see maybe, as well as enlarge this area around the brake bracket. It still was not going low enough so that the swivel would clear the top, and so I actually went in, so you get a little harder to see, I actually went in here and started cutting flush with this extended area and just sort of cut an angle here, which took about 1/2 inch off this back edge. And all of those adjustments allowed it to sit low enough that I can drill new pilot holes, and the seat swivel bracket plate, whatever, will clear the top of my trim. So a little more work, but maybe 20-30 minutes of adjustments, and I'll be able to put my original trim back on, and it'll look more factory. And so I finished bolting down the driver's seat to the swivel, and got all my wires gathered up and routed, tied out of the way, nice and neat. And so the chairs will swivel and the wires won't get tangled or tied. So anyway, hopefully a few things on this video were helpful to you. Did both swivels and the driver's side lowered Sportscraft base, and most of the trim screws in the sides of the seat bases were number 8. And so I ended up using some self-tapping number 8 hex head screws to drill my pilot holes and thread them, and then that made putting in the trim screws fairly easily. So, good luck to you and your swivel install. From WanderWakes, happy trails.